At my mother's 75th birthday, she looked at me and asked, "Who are you?" My sister laughed, whispering that I was nobody important. In that moment, I realized my entire life had been stolen by a calculated lie. I walked out, fought back, and changed everything. Here is my story. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from and what time it is there. I always love knowing who's listening. My name is Amanda Verhoff, 38 years old, and my world shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces over a single plate of untouched salmon during my mother's 75th birthday celebration. The restaurant was filled with the soft clinking of silver and the warm, golden glow of candlelight, a setting meant for joy but dripping with an underlying venom. My mother sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her eyes clouded with the cruel mists of dementia, staring directly through my soul as if I were a ghost made of thin air. When I reached out to touch her fragile, trembling hand, she pulled away sharply, her voice a chilling whisper that pierced the ambient room noise. "Who are you?" Before I could even swallow the lump of sudden grief rising in my throat, a sharp, mocking sound erupted from across the table where my older sister, Beatrice, sat smiling. Beatrice adjusted her expensive diamond bracelet, leaned toward the private nurse we hired, and let out a soft, cruel laugh that made my blood instantly turn to ice. "Don't worry about her, Mom," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness that masked a lifetime of deep jealousy. "She is nobody important, just a visitor who dropped by." The entire room seemed to lose its air as those terrible words hung in the space between us, cementing a betrayal that had been brewing in the dark for years. In absolute shock, my chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor as I stood up, unable to breathe, realizing that my own flesh and blood had just erased my entire existence. I walked out of that suffocating restaurant, the cool night air biting at my skin like a physical rejection of the warmth I had desperately sought to feel moments ago. My high heels clicked against the pavement, a rhythmic, frantic heartbeat of my own anger, as I reached my car and sat in the silence of the driver's seat. Beatrice had been systematically poisoning the well for months, whispering subtle lies in my mother's ear, slowly turning the woman who gave me life into a stranger who no longer knew my name. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned a ghostly white, my mind racing through every stolen heirloom, every missed birthday, and every cold shoulder she had thrown my way, while pretending to be the saint of the family. The betrayal was not sudden. It was a slow, calculated erosion of my place in our legacy, all performed under the guise of caregiving. I saw my reflection in the rearview mirror, a woman who had spent years being the quiet, reliable daughter while Beatrice played the role of the golden child, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. My heart, which had been broken by my mother's vacant stare, hardened into a diamond-sharp resolve that replaced the tears with a dangerous clarity. I would no longer be the victim of her manipulative stagecraft. I would be the director of my own retribution. I started the engine's roar echoing my inner storm, and steered away from the guilt that had kept me paralyzed for far too long. My destination was clear. I was going to change the power balance before the sun rose, ensuring that Beatrice would finally understand the weight of the shadow she had tried to erase. The drive to my attorney's office felt like a journey into a different life, one where I was no longer the invisible sister, but the woman who held the keys to our family's entire future. The streets were deserted at this late hour, illuminated only by flickering yellow lamps that cast long, distorted shadows on the asphalt, mimicking the blurred lines of my own family history. I pulled into the empty parking lot, my pulse drumming a steady rhythm of anticipation against my ribs, knowing that by the time Monday morning arrived, the architecture of our control would be completely demolished. For years, I had watched Beatrice weave a web of deceit, claiming that I was too busy or too indifferent to care for our aging mother, while she simultaneously padded her own bank accounts with our inheritance. She thought I was too passive to notice the shifting titles and the strange, quiet modifications to our mother's legal documents that appeared periodically in the mail. But as a woman who had spent years observing human nature, I had kept my own secret records, a collection of dates, signed papers, and conversations that would now serve as my primary weapons in this war. I unlocked the heavy glass doors of the office building, the cool air inside smelling of old paper and dust, a scent that felt like the neutral ground, where battles for truth were fought and won. I was not looking for a fight. I was looking for a complete restoration of justice, a way to pull the rug out from under the person who had spent her entire existence trying to trip me up. My resolve was absolute, anchored in the reality of the pain I felt, and nothing was going to stop me from ensuring that the truth finally took its rightful place in our narrative. By Monday morning, the legal landscape had shifted, and I held the primary power of attorney over my mother's estate, a move that left me feeling both victorious and profoundly hollow. My attorney, a man of few words and sharp intellect named Mr. Henderson, had worked through the entire weekend to finalize the paperwork that Beatrice had foolishly assumed was exclusively hers to control. I sat in his office, watching the city wake up through the glass panes, listening to the hum of the morning traffic, while my mind processed the enormity of what I had initiated. The look on Beatrice's face when she would realize her access had been revoked was a mental image I played repeatedly, a dark fuel for the fire of my newfound autonomy. It was not about greed. It was about stopping the slow, deliberate theft of my mother's remaining years and the systematic erasure of my own identity. I felt the weight of my mother's future resting squarely on my shoulders, a responsibility that Beatrice had treated like a game of chess, maneuvering pieces only to advance her own status. I had spent so much time being the sister who stayed in the background, the one who accepted the scraps of affection left over from my sister's demands. But that era had died at the lunch table. I signed the last document, my signature firm and unyielding, marking the transition from a passive daughter to a vigilant protector. The world outside remained unaware of the quiet revolution occurring in this room. But I could feel the atmosphere shifting, a subtle pressure drop before a massive storm. I was ready to face the fallout, ready to see how the house of cards Beatrice had built would crumble when the wind of truth finally blew it over for good. The confrontation happened on Tuesday, a day of suffocating tension that began with a furious phone call from Beatrice that I let go straight to my voicemail. My phone buzzed incessantly on the kitchen counter, a digital manifestation of her panic, but I stayed busy pouring coffee and watching the morning light dance across the garden. I knew she would eventually show up at our mother's house, expecting to find the same submissive sister she had spent decades bullying into silence. When her silver sedan screeched into the driveway, I was already standing by the front door, my posture relaxed, but my eyes burning with a cold, unwavering intensity. She stormed inside without knocking, her face flushed with a mixture of disbelief and absolute rage, her eyes searching the living room for someone to blame for her sudden loss of access. "What is this, Amanda?" she shrieked, waving her smartphone in the air like a weapon, her voice losing that polished, sweet veneer she usually wore for others. I simply pointed to the legal documents resting on the coffee table, a stack of papers that held the power to dictate her future movements regarding our mother's care. She stared at the pages, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to comprehend that I had successfully navigated the legal maze she thought was her exclusive territory. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the weight of years of unspoken resentment finally bubbling to the surface. And for the first time, she looked small. She was no longer the queen of our family. She was just a person who had lost her leverage. and the realization hit her harder than any shout or physical shove ever could have. She tried to reclaim her ground by resorting to the same old manipulative tactics, her voice shifting from a sharp scream to a pathetic, weeping tone meant to trigger my guilt. "How could you do this, Amanda? After everything I have sacrificed for Mom while you were busy with your own life?" She paced the small living room, her movements agitated and frantic, throwing accusations that felt like daggers wrapped in velvet. She spoke of late-night visits, medical appointments, and the immense stress of managing our mother's deteriorating health, painting herself as a martyr who was being unfairly persecuted by a cold-hearted sister. I watched her performance with a detachment that surprised even me, noticing for the first time how rehearsed her sorrow truly was. I did not raise my voice, nor did I flinch when she stepped into my personal space, trying to intimidate me with her proximity. Instead, I calmly began to list the discrepancies. I had uncovered the missed payments for the specialized nurse, the strange withdrawals from our mother's account, and the way she had actively discouraged our mother from speaking my name. Each fact I presented was like a brick being pulled from a crumbling wall, and with every word, her mask of victimhood slipped further. She realized that I had moved beyond the realm of emotional pleas and into the harsh, unforgiving world of accountability. She tried to interrupt, to spin a new story, but I simply held up a hand, silencing her with a look of absolute finality. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted, and the woman who once treated me like a ghost was now forced to see me as the person who held her fate in my hands. The air in the house grew thin as the truth settled over us like a shroud, turning the living room into a battlefield, where the only weapons were facts and long-hidden memories. Beatrice slumped into the armchair, her bravado vanishing entirely, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock that I had possessed the foresight to document her every move. She had spent years assuming my silence was equivalent to ignorance, never suspecting that I was cataloging her betrayals with the precision of a court reporter. I stood over her, not to gloat, but to ensure she understood that the days of her unchallenged reign were over. I showed her the bank statements, the emails sent to care facilities, and the logs of canceled doctor visits that she had conveniently kept from me. Her eyes darted around the room, desperate to find an exit or a way to twist the narrative. But every door was locked by the evidence I held in my hands. The realization hit her that her influence over our mother's life was now effectively severed, and she was left with nothing but the echoes of her own past manipulations. It was not a grand, dramatic scene. There was no shouting, no throwing of objects, just the quiet, devastating sound of a life built on lies, finally starting to collapse under the weight of its own deception. I watched her struggle to reconcile her view of herself as the superior sister with the reality of her newfound powerlessness. It was a mirror reflecting her own inner darkness, and for the first time in our lives, she could not look away from what she had truly become. I felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that the rot in our family foundation had been exposed and could finally be cleaned out, no matter how much it hurt to do so. The days that followed were a surreal blur of legal meetings, medical assessments, and the quiet, deliberate process of undoing the damage Beatrice had caused within our mother's sanctuary. I moved into the house, replacing the cold, clinical distance Beatrice had cultivated with a warm, steady presence that honored our mother's history even if she could not articulate it anymore. Every morning I would sit with her by the window, watching the sun rise, and though she still did not know my name, she no longer recoiled from my touch. There was a gentle, fragile peace in these moments that felt like a quiet victory, a restoration of the bond that existed beneath the layers of confusion and pain. I focused entirely on her comfort, ensuring the nurse was attentive, the bills were paid, and the home was filled with music she once loved instead of the tension Beatrice had brought. My sister tried to contact me, sending angry messages and pleading voicemails, but I kept my world shielded, maintaining the boundaries I had so firmly established. This was not about revenge in the sense of causing her pain, but about reclaiming the dignity of my mother's final years. I saw how the environment changed when the lies were stripped away, how the house began to feel like a home. Again, rather than a stage for a manipulative charade, I found myself growing stronger, my confidence returning in ways I had not realized were possible. As if by protecting my mother, I was also healing the parts of myself that had been damaged by years of being treated. Like a secondary character in my own family story, the silence in our mother's house became a powerful testament to the change I had orchestrated, a sanctuary where peace finally replaced the constant, grating friction of my sister's ambition. I found an old, worn journal buried in the back of a desk drawer, filled with my mother's shaky handwriting, detailing memories of our childhood that Beatrice had conveniently ignored for years. Reading those pages brought me closer to the woman my mother used to be, a sharp contrast to the confused soul she had become, and it deepened my commitment to protecting her legacy from further interference. I realized that my sister's cruelty was never really about me, but rather a reflection of her own internal void, a desperate need to feel important by diminishing everyone else around her. I chose to stop reacting to her outbursts, choosing instead to focus on the stability of our environment, which felt like the most profound form of justice I could possibly serve. The quiet, consistent work of providing care became my new mission, a way to channel my energy into something constructive rather than letting it be consumed by resentment. Each evening, as the shadows lengthened across the floorboards, I felt a sense of clarity settle over me that was stronger than any anger I had carried before. I was the one who showed up, the one who stayed, and the one who genuinely cared, regardless of whether my mother could acknowledge my presence or not. It was a silent, persistent rebellion against the narrative Beatrice had tried to weave, proving that the person who truly loves is the one who remains, not the one who screams the loudest or claims the most authority. The final act of this quiet war unfolded on a rainy Friday in a sterile courtroom, a setting that felt strangely appropriate for the formal end of our family's long, bitter dispute. I arrived early, my nerves steady as a heartbeat, and waited for the judge to arrive, feeling the weight of the last 16 months pressing down on my shoulders, like a heavy cloak. Beatrice sat across the aisle, her face pale and her eyes devoid of their usual fire, finally realizing that her performance had reached its final curtain call. She had tried to contest my legal standing, bringing in lawyers to paint me as the unstable, vengeful sister, but the evidence I had meticulously collected over the last year proved to be a mountain she could not scale. I watched as she whispered to her counsel, her body language shifting from arrogance to desperation, a transformation that felt both tragic and inevitable. The judge, an elderly woman with eyes that seemed to have seen every variety of human dishonesty, reviewed our files with a patience that made the room feel as though time itself had stopped. I did not look at Beatrice. My focus was entirely on the truth that was finally being laid bare, a story of abandonment and manipulation that would now become a matter of public record. It was a moment of profound vulnerability, sharing the intimate details of my mother's decline and my sister's calculated heartlessness with strangers in robes and uniforms. But as the judge began to read through the documents, the courtroom grew still, the air thick with an unspoken recognition of the cruelty that had been inflicted in the name of filial duty. The judge paused, her gaze lingering on a small, crumpled piece of paper that I had discovered hidden inside my mother's favorite book, a note written in faint, trembling pencil just weeks before the dementia had fully taken hold. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy vacuum that seemed to draw all the oxygen out of the air as the judge cleared. her throat and began to read the 11 words aloud. I know who Amanda is. She's the only one left. The sound of those words, spoken with such clear, undeniable authority, shattered the remaining defenses that my sister had tried to erect. I felt a single tear trace a hot path down my cheek, not from sorrow, but from the immense relief of knowing that my mother had seen me, truly seen me, even when she could no longer find the words to say it out loud. Beatrice looked as though she had been struck, her hands trembling in her lap as the reality of her defeat solidified in the eyes of everyone present. It was not a grand, dramatic reveal with thunder and lightning, but a quiet, searing moment of clarity that stripped away the years of lies and left us standing in the raw, cold light of the truth. The courtroom, once a place of intimidating procedure, felt like a sacred space where the history of our family was finally being rewritten to reflect the reality of our shared trauma. My sister did not look at me, and I did not look at her. We were both frozen in the aftermath of those 11 words, which had effectively dismantled the false kingdom she had spent her entire adult life attempting to build on a foundation of deception. The gavel fell with a finality that signaled the end of my long, exhausting journey through the dark corridors of family betrayal and manipulation. As I walked out of that courthouse, the rain had stopped, and the gray clouds were parting to reveal a sliver of bright, hopeful sky, a perfect metaphor for the clarity I finally possessed. Beatrice was gone, vanished into the city like a ghost, leaving me alone to face a future that I could now define on my own terms without her. Poisonous shadow looming over me. My mother was safe, her dignity restored, and I had reclaimed my own narrative, proving that the quiet observer is often the one who holds the most strength when the world demands it. I realized that justice is not always a loud, fiery explosion. Sometimes it is the soft, persistent light of truth that eventually burns away the deepest lies. My journey from a forgotten daughter to the sole protector of our legacy has been a painful but necessary path toward finding my own voice in a world that tried to silence me. I leave you with this final thought. Do not let anyone tell you who you are, because the only person who can write your story is you, especially when the odds are stacked against you. I have found my resilience, and I have secured the peace that was stolen from me, all by simply refusing to let the darkness win. If you have ever felt erased, ignored, or underestimated by someone you love, know that your time to rise will come if you are brave enough to stand for your own truth. This was my fight, my tragedy, and ultimately, my victory, a testament that even when you are written out, you can write yourself back in with even greater strength and purpose. Thank you for listening to my story and walking this road of justice with me today. If you found power in this journey of survival and want to see more real-life transformations, please do not forget to like and subscribe for more.